Hey, I got new headphones.
What are they?
The Sony 1000 WX3s or whatever the hell.
Sick product name.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's like they're this soft plastic. I don't know how to describe it. It's like every time you pick them
Okay.
up, it's like ASMR for your fingertips.
Oh, that's nice. Welcome to episode 355 of the Design Details Podcast. I'm Brian Levin.
And I'm Marshall Bach. Welcome back for another episode. Brian, I think we're going to keep this one kind of short. Famous last words, but...
Let's do it. First up, we have our golden ratio supporter back in business. Float, are you still using spreadsheets to plan your projects? You dummies, don't do that. Float is a resource management software tool built for creative teams. You can add your team's roles, departments' work hours, schedule time off, public holidays, and remote work days, all so you can have the truest view of your team's availability. Ditch the spreadsheet and learn more at float.com/design details. Thank you to Float.
Thanks, Float.
We also have some new VIPs this week, some very important pixels. Huge shout outs to Hannah, Tristan Scaglia, Kelly Novotny, Nico Lazarus, Eric Stahl, Adam Ho, and last but not least, Chip.
I was going to comment on Hannah. First name only, no last name. That's a movie, Brian. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the movie, but she's like a little assassin girl, and it's awesome. You should watch that one.
Hannah, that's the name of the movie?
Yeah, Hannah.
I don't think I've seen it.
And it's a palindrome.
Oh, that is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you do the double ends. Well, I guess the single end would be all the same, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Hannah no matter what, unless you drop the H at the end. Anyways, thank you very much for supporting the show. If you didn't know, we are a listener-supported podcast, and that means that you, listener, make the show possible. So we have a Patreon, and when people support our Patreon, that money goes directly to helping us produce, edit, and create this show every single week. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do that at patreon.com/design details. And for just $1 a month, you'll get access to a new weekly segment called The Sidebar. The Sidebar is a subscriber-only kind of cool things, but design specific. And this week, we dig into our first impressions of macOS Big Sur, including the things we like and the things that really kind of suck right now. So if you want to hear us dig into the Big Sur details, go to patreon.com/design details and support us for just $1 a month. And we really appreciate it, and it makes the show possible. So thank you to everyone who subscribed this week.
Thank you.
That's patreon.com/design details. Okay, so Marshall, you know how in the new iOS 14, whenever an app reads from your pasteboard, it shows this little toast at the top of your screen?
Mm-hmm.
And it's caused a lot of controversy. In fact, I think now someone is suing LinkedIn because LinkedIn was reading your pasteboard like every 3 seconds. Then TikTok was reading it every time you typed a couple characters, and basically it just became this way of like discovering all these apps that were looking into your pasteboard. And by the way, many of these are not nefarious, but some of them possibly. We'll see.
How do you know, right? How
do you know? Exactly. Like the OS doesn't distinguish between good actors and bad actors in this way. So Hugo Tunius tweeted at us and says about the clipboard stuff. So Apple actually does now have an API that supports apps who are looking for patterns in the pasteboard before they access it. So you could look for like a tracking number pattern or a URL pattern before you decide to sort of grab it out of the user's pasteboard. And we'll have a link in the show notes, but Hugo also did a bunch of research into how apps are using this new feature. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So if you're interested in digging into this sort of pasteboard snafu, link in the show notes. So thanks, Hugo, for the tweet. And last little note here, speaking of tweets, thank you to everyone who tweeted at Itong from our episode and interview last week. Sounds like a lot of people found value out of hearing his sort of story and details about what it's like to design while going through the visa process in the U.S.
I know I did.
So if you enjoyed last week's episode, please keep those tweets coming and tweet at Itong. We'll have another link in the show notes to his Twitter account.
Cool.
All right, we have a listener question. It's been a little while since we've had a listener question because we've had 2 interviews and then the dub. So basically like a month since we've done an interview or a listener question.
Yeah.
All right, this one comes from Rachie Jacobs on our GitHub. Rachie opened an issue, says, am I actually meant to be a product manager? And elaborates. Rachie says, I'm a product designer and I work with very talented designers on my team. I constantly find myself trying very hard to push myself up into higher level product discussions and decisions with the product managers, since I feel it's part of my job to not just get product requirements handed down and design them, but to be part of the definition.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like no one else on the design team really cares as much and are happy to get very specific requirements and flows. So I wonder, is it just my company who doesn't value the role of product designers, or is it the state of the industry? Would I be happier as a product manager?
Wow. That is a tough question. Okay, the first thing that I think, Brian, is would you rather be given orders or to help contribute to the definition of a new thing?
Contribute to the definition of a new thing.
Me too. I think so too. But not everybody does, right? Some people just are like, yeah, I'm good at following orders. You know what I mean? Like I'm good at and if you work with really good product managers, like they've figured out all this stuff, they know all the metrics, they know all the reasons for why they're making the decisions they're making. Anything you would provide would just be like visual recommendations, you know, of like, oh, let's use this pattern instead of that pattern. I don't know.
I find there to be, and this has been true everywhere I've worked, there is an interesting tension between a senior / lead designer and a product manager, because they often sit in the same meetings. They both have strong opinions on product. They both tend to overlap in terms of like execution and road mapping and thinking about like design constraints. Obviously, product also thinks about other things like on the engineering side. Anyways, I do find there is this tension here where the higher you go as a designer, you kind of end up in conversations where you're saying things that kind of sound like things a product manager might say, or you find yourself thinking in ways a product manager might think. And it's probably a little bit different on every team, within every org, within every company, how that tension is navigated, because I think a lot of times it can come down to like the strength of a personality between the PM on a team and a designer on a team. But anyways, I say all this to say, I think it's totally natural for you, Rachie, to be in a position as a designer where you're thinking at the level of someone who would be called a product manager, like thinking about product definition, scope, like strategy, that kind of thing feels very natural to me to see designers sort of occupy that space. Now, the question will be, are you happy there? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Do you like that kind of work? And if the answer is yes, and you also are still able to design, then it sounds like maybe you have a fantastic role where you got the seat at the table to define a product, and then you get to actually go back with your team and design the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a dream job. I love that sort of intersection. But maybe you might find over time the design part to be a little more distracting. Like you'd actually rather just spend time thinking about product. So if that's the case, then yeah, go be a product manager. But I wouldn't worry too much personally about this, like trying to find this clear line between the two, because I think there's a lot of overlap. I don't know, Marshall, have you had the same experience, like working across different teams with this tension between PMs and design?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a universal truth I found in my experience, just based on the people that I've worked with, is that everybody has an opinion, Brian. And I've also found that the earlier you hear those opinions, the easier it is to incorporate them into your work. If you are just a bunch of PMs in a room by yourselves making decisions, the second that designers see that thing, they're going to be like, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Things that you didn't think of as a PM that only a designer might think of. And then if engineers are excluded from that process, eventually when designers are done doing their thing and give it to the engineer is going to be like, have you considered this use case? Oh, we didn't think about that because we're just designers. We're not engineers, you know? So like my preference is typically to have as many representatives of different realms as possible. One engineer, one PM, one researcher, one designer, right? So that everybody can have their domain that they can raise their hand and say, actually, this is going to be a problem. You might not know, but, right? So another thing that I think is interesting about this is like, if you want to be a PM and you also want to have an opinion on what the visuals look like, my experience has been that designers don't take design advice very well from non-designers. I don't know, like ideas, sure, but like this button should look like that doesn't usually go over very well. And if you want to have that type of input as a PM, maybe you'd be better off doing PM stuff as a designer rather than trying to do designer stuff as a PM. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is like exposing some human flaws, but I think in a lot of cases that flaw is realized and true, that designers want feedback from designers and might not be as comfortable getting that fidelity of feedback from a PM.
Yeah.
But if you're in this situation where you have the opportunity to transition, and the team that you work with can witness that transition, then they know that you are a design-minded PM. Like you have
Right.
technical PMs and you have design PMs and, like, I don't know, businessy PMs. Like there's all these different kinds and sort of strata. And like if you occupy that role of being a design-minded PM, maybe it doesn't make it too hard to give design feedback to your peers.
Yeah, those are. I definitely have design-minded engineers that I work with, and PMs, but usually it's engineers that are design-minded that I love to work with because they're thinking the same way that I'm thinking, and they gut check me on my shit. You know what I mean?
100%.
And they care, man. They care about the pixels.
Yes, and that's okay. Well, actually, that brings me to the next thing on my mind when I was reading this question, which was I got the sense that this question asker maybe feels a little bit of tension around, like, I am starting to care about things that other designers don't seem to care about. Am I still a designer? Like that's kind of the vibe that I got.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the beautiful thing about working on a team is that you can have people who give a shit about different things, and those different levels of giving a shit sort of all coalesce into hopefully a great product. And so as you're talking about having design-minded engineers or design-minded PMs, and then you have the opposite, like infrastructure-minded engineers and strategy-minded PMs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy to work with people who give a shit about things that I really don't give a shit about. That way we kind of cover all of our bases.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with designers who don't care about this kind of stuff and they're really happy to just get like a requirement and a flow and they design the pixels, that's kind of a blessing. That's like a superpower for you. It's like, oh, this thing that you don't want to do anymore, there's other people who love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Like, isn't it great that you all ended up on a team together?
Yeah, supplementary, right? Like, it's also very important in picking a partner, Brian.
And moving on to dating advice with Marshall and Brian.
Yeah, right.
Well, here, let me hit you with this last question, Marshall. What do you do when you and a design-minded PM sort of clash on what you think the design of a thing should be?
I don't know that that's ever happened. My PMs usually trust me in the same way I trust them. And I think this is this is where it gets a little sketchy, is when you start stepping on toes, potentially, of like, if I think I can do your job better than you can do your job, and your job is like your main job, and maybe I know a little bit about it, but like Dunning-Kruger, right? So I don't know. They usually don't step on my toes because they trust me, and I trust them. So I've never had that happen before. I don't know. I don't know how I would handle it. I would probably be pretty cool about it. I mean, usually logic and just explaining rationale is enough to get to a good solution in any argument, regardless of whether it's the solution I wanted or not. Like if you talk through it enough and you consider all the angles, at least you can come to an understanding, even if it's not your favorite pet answer,
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think finding that trust is the most important part here. So hopefully that you're not sort of butting heads or stepping on each other's toes. I think that there is sort of this hidden power that designers have when they get into any sort of maybe not strategy discussion, but like product shaping or definition conversation, which is that designers, if you're equipped with the right tool set to prototype things quickly, a prototype can often win an argument. Like when you move out of word land and static mock land and say, okay, let's actually try it and see how it feels. Go to this URL and click around and see how it feels. That's usually a fast track to like solving a debate.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it doesn't sound like you're at this situation, Rachie, but this was like a nice little tangent for PM and designer relations, which I don't know. I feel like it's common knowledge that there's tends to be some tension there, but that's not always the case. I think a well-functioning team can clearly define those roles, and people just trust each other that we're all working towards a unified product vision, I suppose.
Yeah. It is the trope, though, right? Like, it's a thing I hear from my friends a lot, of like hating to work with PMs. And I'm like, oh, that sucks for you. I have good PMs. I like my PMs.
All right. Any other advice for Rachie here? Should Rachie be a product manager, Marshall?
I don't know, Brian. I don't know. I think she should do what is best for her. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in situations like this, if you find yourself drawn and excited and invigorated by a certain kind of work, follow that path, but just realize like these things are not mutually exclusive. Like, I think you can do both at a high level as a designer. And it sounds like you have a great team behind you that can execute upon it. So,
Yeah.
good luck. But if we missed anything or misinterpreted the question, definitely follow up with a comment in your GitHub issue. Okay, Marshall, should we do cool things?
Yes, let's do it.
I'll go first. Mine is I got a hat tip, Gabriel Valdivia. He is increasingly becoming a source of my cool things.
Yeah. How many hosts do we have on this show again? I forget. I thought it was just 2, but now I'm starting to second guess that.
No, Gabe. Every once in a while, he hits me with a real gem. This week, Gabe sent me a website called folklore.org. And folklore.org, I'd never heard of this. Have you ever heard of this, Marshall?
Nope, but I'm reading through the first few lines and I'm already intrigued.
Yeah, okay. So here's the byline on the About page. Folklore.org is a website devoted to collective historical storytelling. It captures and presents sets of related stories that describe interesting events from multiple perspectives. But I think that intro would lead you to think this is something that it's not. This is a story or a collection of stories from the tech world. And some of the links that Gabe sent me are like early anecdotes from designers working at places like Apple. A link that he sent me it's called Round Recs Are Everywhere. And it's by Andy Hertzfeld, who was at Apple in 1981. You might recognize that name from the General Magic documentary, that Andy Hertzfeld.
Yep.
And Andy tells the story of how round recs came to be a primitive shape in the Apple ecosystem. It's kind of just a cool little story. So anyways, folklore.org is filled with lots of these stories, and you can kind of scroll through the list and see like, oh, here's the author, here's the year it took place, and the products in question, like the Apple II or design or management. And just really go down a rabbit hole here. So there's some fun anecdotes.
I'm reading this article. Sorry, I got distracted. This is great. I will be clicking through this and keeping that tab open. Cool thing, Brian. My cool thing this week is from someone you may know, previous host of the podcast, Bryn Jackson.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, never heard of him. What an asshole. He's doing some culinary stuff, and I think he's always had like a bit of a cooking bug, and whenever we would hang out at his place, he would always like be making stuff and like exercising that. So it's cool to see him now pursuing this with his own. I guess is the name of the company Cult Favorite?
I think it's called Cult Favorite, and it's a proper company and everything.
Yeah, and so I just ordered this. It's the first collection number 1, summer 2020. There are 3 items in the first collection. There's a ketchup, a hot sauce, and a yellow mustard, and $60. The packaging on this shit is fucking gorgeous, Brian. Have you seen it?
I have. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Marshall, I can do you one better. I've tasted all 3 of these objects.
Oh yeah,
I've
and
tasted these condiments.
Yes,
and they are delightful. It's like, have you ever had like a cheap olive oil and then a proper olive oil, or like a cheap balsamic and then like a proper balsamic?
I don't think so. I don't put cheap shit in my body, Brian. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. Never back to back like that. No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, let's just say this. There's like this world that exists at the grocery store, which is just kind of like cheap shit. And that's why people like to go to farmers markets and like upscale grocery stores, because you just get better ingredients, and the magic of these ingredients just changes the fundamental way a thing tastes.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had specifically the mustard and ketchup, it's like, oh shit, this is what ketchup is supposed to taste like.
Yeah.
So it's really lovely, great flavors with like proper ingredients. You won't ever want to go back to that, I don't know, Heinz fucking red bottle shit ever again.
Yeah. And is Sarah involved too?
So yeah, props to Bryn and Sarah for these recipes and the packaging and the whole production. It's really impressive.
Yeah, super cool. Oh, you're actually in the thank yous at the bottom, Brian. Did you know that?
I don't know why. I think it's literally because I tasted them and said, oh, fuck yeah, that's good.
Amazing. Yeah, anyways, well, if you're looking to buy some expensive ass but beautifully packaged and well-made condiments from fam of the pod, And yeah, check it out. Cult.supply. CULT.supply.
Lovely.
Let's get out of here, Brian.
All right. We hope you enjoyed it. This has been episode 355. Let us know what you thought. We're on Twitter, as always, at Design Details FM. If you have your own question for us, hit us up on GitHub and open an issue in the specfm/design details repo. Just go to github.com/specfm and you'll make your way there. You can ask us a question that helps us keep track. So big shout out to Rachie Jacobs for asking this week's question. Of course, if you wanted to get the full episode, if you wanted to hear our macOS Big Sur first impressions in the sidebar, be sure you're supporting us on Patreon. We're a listener-supported show, and for just $1 a month, you can make this show possible. That's at patreon.com/design details. Thank you so much. Oh, Marshall, we had a big week this week. We crossed 256 very important pixels.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Nice round number. So shout out to all 256 plus of you out there that are supporting the show. It
Wow.
really does make this possible. It helps us pull this off. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And with that, we'll catch you next week.
Bye-bye.
You know what I thought of when I read out Nico Lazarus's name?
Grand Theft Auto 4?
Uh,
Being raised from the dead?
I thought of Kirk Lazarus from Tropic Thunder. Small anecdote here. I'm currently on just sort of a multi-month movie exploration with my parents
Okay.
and kind of, bobbing and weaving, figuring out what their tastes and preferences are, figuring out where we overlap. Anyways, I watched Tropic Thunder with my parents.
I don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, it's a great movie, but I don't know if I would watch that with my parents.
Very good movie. I think they kind of enjoyed it, but I had forgotten that the opening words of that movie are Al Pacino doing the Booty Sweat rap song.
Yep.
And it's like very, very vulgar and inappropriate.
Yes.
And my parents, like, first 5 seconds are like, are we sure about this? Like,
Yeah.
no, just get through this one fake trailer and then you'll kind of get it.